Arizona Territory, 1886. A mother left to die in the desert with 5 children until a cowboy's vow would change everything. Now we are 6. This is Nizhoni's story, and it does not end at any altar. It ends with a chosen family a whole town almost refused. Stay with it, because what happens under the stars months from now is worth the wait. Now, rewind 2 days, to the desert that nearly finished them. The sun over the Arizona desert that August did not rise so much as arrive, all at once and without mercy, and by 9 in the morning the vermilion rock was already too hot to touch bare-handed. Even the lizards had gone to ground, tucked into whatever cracked shade they could find. Emmett Callister rode through it anyway, because a man tracking wild mustangs through the Mogollon breaks for 4 straight days does not get to pick his weather. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Domino, picked his way over the baked hardpan with the patient contempt of an animal who had earned a bath, a cool stall, and a week of rest, and fully intended to collect on all 3. Emmett had exactly one thought left in his skull by that point, and it was simple. Get to Cinder Wells, get into a tub, and sleep for 2 days straight. He was 34 years old that summer, sun-leathered, quiet by nature, and quieter by habit. He had been riding these same red flats more or less alone since he was 11 years old, the year both his parents were buried inside the same terrible week, and a boy who should have still been a child learned to sleep under open sky without anybody's arms around him. 23 years of that kind of solitude does something to a man. It teaches him to need almost nothing. It does not, it turns out, teach him to stop wanting. 4 days tracking a band of mustangs through broken country will strip a man down to the plainest version of himself. There is no company out there but the horse under you and the sound of your own thoughts, and Emmett had long since made peace. He had eaten cold beans out of the tin more nights than he could count that week, slept with one eye half open for cougar sign, and lost the mustangs twice in a stretch of Red Rock Canyon, before finally running them to a waterhole 2 mornings back and turning for home satisfied with the count. It was honest work, and it suited a man who preferred a horse's silence to most people's conversation. He had never once minded the solitude of it. He simply had never had anything else to compare it to. He was whistling something tuneless, some half-remembered trail tune with no real ending, when he saw them. At first the shapes by the Saguaro looked like cattle, or maybe a downed mule, and Emmett almost rode on past without slowing. Then one of the shapes moved in a way no animal moves, small and human and unbearably slow, and his stomach dropped clean through the saddle. He put his heels into Domino before he had finished deciding to. The gelding, feeling the change run through his rider like current through wire, broke straight into a gallop and threw a rooster tail of gold dust up into a white, merciless sky. What Emmett found when he finally pulled up would live with him for the rest of his life. A woman sat propped against the base of the cactus, knees drawn to her chest, and gathered around her, pressed into whatever slim shade her body could throw, were 5 small children. Her lips had split and crusted. Her skin had gone past sunburn into something raw and angry. The children, 5 of them, and unmistakably the same face, repeated 5 times over, none older than 6, held the particular stillness of the very young when they have finally stopped expecting anyone to come for them. The woman lifted her head, whatever Emmett braced himself to find in her eyes. Fear, maybe, at a stranger bearing down on her out of nowhere on a galloping horse. He found neither. He found exhaustion worn straight through into a terrible, glassy calm, and underneath that, something that split his heart clean in half before a single word had passed between them. "Please, water. My children need water." Her voice came out papered dry, barely more than breath. Emmett was off Domino before the horse had fully stopped moving. He dropped to his knees in front of the nearest child, a boy with enormous dark eyes fixed on him with a hope so raw it was hard to look at directly. He uncorked his canteen. Easy now, partner. Slow. Real slow." The words came out gentler than he'd known he had in him. He tipped the canteen to the boy's lips, just enough, and watched the child drink like that water was the single most precious thing left in the world. Eyes came alive by careful degrees, the way stars come out one at a time at dusk. He moved to the next child, and the next, more patient than he had ever been patient with anything, until all 5 had been given water. Only then did he pass the canteen to the mother. She drank with tears, cutting clean lines through the dust caked across her face. "Thank you, mister. My name is Nizhoni. These are my children, Kaya, Nantan, Shanoa, Ashki." Amit dug hardtack and dried beef from his saddlebags, broke it into pieces, and passed it around the small circle. The children ate the way people eat who have gone far too long without, quick and quiet and half afraid it might vanish. While they chewed, he studied their faces, dirt-streaked, hair tangled, clothes worn nearly to threads, and underneath all of that, something no desert on earth had managed to burn out of them. A light. He had never once seen 5 children shine quite like that. "What are you doing out here alone? Where's your people?" Nizhoni's gaze dropped to the sand between her knees. Her hands trembled where they rested in her lap. Her people had to move north fast, she told him, soldiers not far behind them, the trail long and dangerous and unforgiving of anyone slow, and her 5 small children were too slow. The one who led them had called her a burden, said she would put the whole band in danger. They left her 2 days ago with a little water and nothing else, and by her own reckoning, she had spent every hour since certain she would watch her children die one at a time in this exact spot. It was not cruelty. Exactly, and even in his anger, Emmett understood that much. A people running from soldiers, moving fast through hostile country, had made a desperate calculation about who could keep the pace and who could not, and a mother with 5 small children had lost that calculation. He had heard enough, in his time on this frontier, to know the choice had likely cost the one who made it plenty of sleep since. That understanding did not make the desert any less merciless, or the 2 days Nizhoni and her children had spent alone in it any less unforgivable. Something caught fire in Emmett's chest, a rage so pure and sudden it startled him. To leave a mother and 5 children in open desert was a death sentence, regardless of the reasoning behind it, and there was no version of that he could find any real mercy in. But then he looked at the children again. One girl watched him with open, unguarded curiosity. One boy was working up a gap-toothed grin like it cost him something dear. A little girl had buried both hands in Domino's mane, marveling at the horse like he was a small miracle. 2 of the 5 held on to each other, the way children hold on when the only sure thing left in the world is each other's small hands. Something in Emmett Callister, something that had been asleep for 23 years, turned over and woke up. He took off his hat and pressed it to his chest. He looked at each child in turn, straight in the eye, and did not look away. "Now you listen to me good. I don't know the first thing about being a father, never had a family of my own to learn it from, don't know how to braid hair, don't know a single bedtime story worth telling. But I know this, and I want every one of you to hear it plain. Nobody is ever going to leave you behind again. Not while I'm still breathing, you understand?" 5 sets of eyes went round as coins. "You mean it?" Small, uncertain, from the boy called Nantan. "I mean it. You're my family now, and I am yours, for good." He looked up at Nizhoni, something gone soft in his face that had not been soft in a long time. "Before I was just one man, a cowboy with no particular place to be. Now we are 6, a real family, the kind that stays together, whatever comes at it." Kaya moved first, breaking into tears of pure relief, throwing both small arms fiercely around his neck. Nantan came next, then Shanoa, then Ashki and Doli, arriving together, the way they seemed to do everything together, and within a breath all 5 children had him wrapped in one enormous, bruising hug. Nizhoni pressed both hands to her mouth. weeping now, with a gratitude too large to fit into words. Just Emmett, he managed, 5 children hanging off his neck like burrs. And don't thank me yet. We've got a hard 4 hours to Cinder Wells ahead of us. Time to get organized. With the practical efficiency of a man who had spent a lifetime managing horses on far worse odds, he got everyone settled on Domino. Kaya and Dolly rode, secured in the saddle. Nantan and Ashkieh each took a knee. Chinoa rode in Nizhoni's arms, and Nizhoni climbed up behind him. Domino snorted once under the sudden weight, and then simply carried it, steady as he had always been, steady as though he too understood something important had just changed. If a story like this one is the kind that stays with you, hit subscribe now, because what waits for this family under a full sky of stars months from tonight is not one you'll want to miss. They rode toward town as the sun sank low and gold across the horizon, and somewhere along the way, Emmett started up an old trail song, low and badly off-key. The children didn't know a single word of it, but they hummed along anyway, small voices filling up that empty desert with something it had not carried in a long, long time. The sky burned orange, then rose, then violet. The desert that had nearly killed them an hour ago now looked impossibly beautiful. Nizhoni smiled, a real smile, the first in days, and the warm evening wind moved over all 6 of them like something close to a blessing. Emmett looked around at what he was suddenly carrying home. 5 children singing badly off-key. A mother, alive, watching her own babies with fresh hope written plain across her face. A good horse hauling more weight than he'd ever asked of him without a single complaint. Something warm rose in Emmett's chest that he did not yet have a name for, but it sat there, steady and good, the way nothing had sat in him for 23 years. He had ridden these roads alone the whole of that time. Slept alone under this same stretch of sky more nights than any man ought to count. Eaten alone beside 100 silent campfires, nobody across from him. Nobody waiting up. That chapter was closed now. He was father to 5 children he had known for exactly 1 long afternoon, and he could no longer picture a version of his life without every one of them in it. Cinder Wells rose out of the flat like something conjured, wood frame buildings catching the last amber light, chimney smoke curling up into a darkening pink sky. Is that our new home? Chinoa's voice was thick with wonder. Emmett smiled bigger than he had smiled in longer than he could remember. It sure is, sweetheart. That's where we're all going to be happy together. The children cheered, their laughter ringing out over open ground like little bells, and Domino picked up his pace as though he too wanted to arrive faster. The gate at the edge of Cinder Wells creaked as Emmett rode his new family through it, right at supper time, the street still busy. Shopkeepers were closing up for the evening. Children finished a last game in the square. Women carried baskets of fresh bread home from the bakery down the block. Then the town saw a lone cowboy riding in with an Apache woman and 5 identical children behind him, and every single soul on that street stopped exactly where they stood. Silence dropped over Cinder Wells like a thrown blanket. Conversations died mid-sentence. The children in the square froze mid-game. Every eye in town turned toward the newcomers, some wide with plain shock, others narrowing with something uglier underneath. Emmett felt the weight of it land on him like a physical thing, but he kept his chin level and his shoulders square. Nizhoni looked down, uncomfortable under the sheer volume of staring. All 5 children pressed in tighter against Emmett, feeling the cold welcome for exactly what it was. Don't you mind them, they'll come around. We're good people, and they're going to see it soon enough. He kept his voice low, meant only for his own family to hear. He rode straight for his place at the end of the main street. Plain wood frame, a wide porch out front, a stable out back, nothing fancy but solid, with room to spare. He had barely swung down from the saddle when the neighboring door banged open. Mrs. Pruitt planted herself on her own porch, arms crossed hard over her chest, a face built for disapproval and a tongue sharpened to match. Emmett Callister, What in God's name have you dragged into this town? Savages? On our street?" He turned to face her. His voice stayed level, but there was iron underneath it now. "Mrs. Pruitt, allow me to introduce my family. This is Nizhoni, and these are my 5 children, Kaya, Nantan, Chinoa, Ashki, and Doli. They live with me now." The old woman nearly choked on her own outrage. "Your family? They're wild. You can't bring wild things into a decent town." The children shrank in against Emmett's legs. Kaya cried without a sound. Nantan's small fists clenched at his sides. Nizhoni laid a protective hand over Chinoa's shoulder. And something in Emmett went hard and hot all at once. 2 slow steps toward Mrs. Pruitt, eyes lit with a fury. He was holding on a very short leash. "Ma'am, these people nearly died 2 days ago. Their own kin left them in open desert with no water, no food, and no way home. They are human beings, exactly the same as you and I, and now they are my family. If that's a problem for you, it's your problem. It surely isn't mine." Something in the flatness of it, the sheer immovability, made Mrs. Bill Pruitt take an actual step backward. She had never once seen the quiet cowboy square off like that in her life. Before she could find her next retort, another voice cut clean across the street. "Emmett, you're back!" Doc Vega, 60 years old, silver-mustached, with the kind of tired, kind eyes that had seen most of what a frontier town had to offer, hurried over with his medical bag already in hand. "Doc, good to see you." Relief was plain on Emmett's face. Doc Vega reached them and gave Nizhoni and the children a fast, clinical once-over. Dehydrated, exhausted, sun-punished. How long had they been out there? 2 days. Near enough no water at all. Found them this afternoon. Dear God. He dropped to a crouch in front of the children, his whole manner softening at once. "Hello there, little ones, Doc Vega." Would they let him have a look, just to make sure everyone was all right? The children glanced up at Emmett first, waiting on his nod, and when it came, Kaya, the boldest of the 5, stepped forward. "I'll go first," shaking but sure of herself. He examined each child with slow, unhurried patience, then turned to Nizhoni. "Sun scorched, mild burns, dehydration, nothing that wouldn't heal with rest, food, and plenty of water. A few days, and they'd be right as rain. Lucky finding them when he had. Wasn't luck, Doc, it was a miracle." That was when Etta Brock arrived, the general store's owner, broad, rosy-cheeked, a face that seemed built entirely for smiling. What a surprise Emmett had brought them. Were these children really his now? "They are, Etta. All 5. We're a family." She looked the children over, tired and filthy, and worn thin, then looked at Nizhoni, who held her chin level with a quiet, unbroken dignity despite everything. Etta's whole face lit up like a struck match. They'd be needing new clothes, she declared. Poor things were in rags. Ring them by the store come morning, and she'd fix them all up, trousers, shirts, dresses, hats, whatever was needed. "Etta, I don't have much cash to spare right now." She waved a hand like swatting off a fly. He'd pay when he could. Everybody in this town knew Emmett Callister was a man of his word, and besides, these children needed it now, not whenever his pockets happened to fill back up. The children stared at her in open astonishment. She was the first person in this whole town, past Emmett and the doctor, to show them real kindness. "Thank you, ma'am. That's real good of you." Nantan's voice, soft and certain. Etta melted clean through at that, crouching down to their level. Call her Aunt Etta, sweetheart. And they were welcome at her store, any hour they pleased. She always kept candy on hand for good children. "Candy!" All 5 said at once, eyes lit up, and it startled a laugh out of half the onlookers still watching from a careful distance. Even Doc Vega cracked a smile. That night, Emmett heated vegetable soup on the stove. Nothing fancy but hot, and there was plenty of it. The 6 of them gathered around his table, and for the first time in his adult life, Emmett did not eat a meal alone. The children ate like they had never tasted anything so good, laughing between bites, Nanton cracking terrible jokes that got everybody giggling anyway, Kaya humming a tune in Apache under her breath, Ashkie and Dolly trading silly voices back and forth, Chenoa simply smiling, quiet and content in a way she had not been in days. Nizhoni watched Emmett across the table with an expression he did not yet have words for. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for us. You saved our lives. You gave us hope. You gave us a home." He shook his head slowly. "No, you saved me. I was living alone, no purpose, no reason to climb out of bed most mornings. Now I've got 5 reasons. 5 beautiful reasons that make every single day worth getting up for." The children stopped eating and looked at him. 5 faces lit with something close to pure love. "We love you, Papa Emmett." Kaya, out of nowhere, plain as anything. It was the first time in his entire life anyone had called him Papa. Something in his chest cracked open and rebuilt itself in the very same instant. "I love you too, all of you, with everything I've got." After supper, he arranged the sleeping quarters, the 5 children in one room on clean pallets, himself on the old sofa in the front room, Nizhoni in the other. He tucked each child in with a blanket, awkward at it, because he had never once done this in his life, but doing it with more care than he had ever given anything before. "Good night, champs. Tomorrow our new life together really starts." "Good night, Papa." 5 small voices together. He shut the door softly and stood a long moment in the hallway, listening to 5 sets of slow, even sleeping breath. In the dark, he found himself smiling. For the first time in 23 years, Emmett Callister was not alone. The next morning, true to her word, Etta Brock had the store ready for them before the sun had cleared the roofline. Bolts of calico and dungaree lined one wall, hats of every size stacked by the door, and Etta herself stood in the middle of it all with a measuring tape draped around her neck like a badge of office. The children filed in, wide-eyed, still half convinced this kind of welcome couldn't be real. "Stand still now, Miguel. I mean Nantan. Forgive me, sweetheart. I'll learn all your names by supper. I promise you that." Etta wound the tape around his shoulders, clucking to herself, already reaching for a stack of folded shirts. Kaya spun once in front of the cracked store mirror in a new blue dress, watching the skirt flare out around her, and laughed out loud at her own reflection like she'd never once seen anything so fine. Chenoa found a straw hat, 2 sizes too big, and refused to take it off. Ashkie and Dolly argued happily over who got the red shirt and who got the green, until Etta produced a second red one from a back shelf and settled the matter entirely. Nizhoni stood near the counter in a dress of soft brown cotton that Etta had pressed into her hands before she could protest, and for a moment, catching her own reflection, she looked less like a woman who had nearly died in the sand 2 days before, and more like someone who might, in time. Word of the new family spread through Cinder Wells faster than Etta's tape measure could keep up, and by mid-morning, half the street had found some reason to walk past the general store window. Not all the looks were kind, but a few were curious rather than cold, and 1 or 2, to Emmett's quiet surprise, were something closer to approving. Small progress, maybe, but it was progress, and he took it as such. The following week, Emmett walked all 5 children down to the little one-room schoolhouse at the end of 2nd Street, new boots still stiff on their feet, and stood in the doorway a moment longer than he needed to before he could make himself let go of Kaya's hand. Miss Clara, the schoolteacher, was young for the job and had a reputation in town for being fair, even when fair was unpopular, and she crossed the room at once to crouch down to the children's height rather than make them crane their necks up at a stranger. "I hear you 5 already know your letters better than half my class," she said, which was not entirely true yet, but would be within a month. "I could use the help keeping the back row honest. Think you're up to it?" A few of the other children shifted in their seats, and would not quite meet the newcomer's eyes, and one boy in the back, Toby Marsh, though nobody yet knew him for anything more than the loudest voice in the room, muttered something under his breath that made the row around him snicker. Miss Clara's gaze cut to him once, sharp and unhurried, and the snickering died fast enough. It was not an easy first morning. Nantan came home with his knuckles scraped from a shoving match nobody adult had witnessed, and Chenoa cried at supper about an empty seat beside her at lunch that no one had chosen to fill. But Emmett listened to every word of it without once suggesting they quit, because quitting was not a thing this family did anymore, and by week's end, even Chenoa had found one girl willing to share a bench. It would be a good while yet before that schoolhouse felt like anything close to home, but it was a start. Same as the store, same as the street, one stubborn, ordinary morning at a time. Before we go further into what happened at Cinder Wells, if you'd like to help keep stories like Nizhoni's coming, tap the join button beside the channel name and become a member. Takes about 10 seconds. Sunday broke gray, low clouds pressing down over the whole territory. The air gone thick and charged in a way that meant weather was coming. Emmett stood at the window with his coffee, frowning up at the sky. He knew that smell. A big storm was on its way, and it would be along before the day was out. The children woke that morning bursting with excitement for their first full Sunday in a real home. Nizhoni taught them to press corn tortillas in the kitchen, working the dough with obvious love. Food made that way always tasted better, she told them. Kaya's first attempt came out lopsided and full of holes, and she held it up like a trophy anyway, shouting for everyone to look. The whole kitchen dissolved into laughter, a sound so warm it filled the little house wall to wall. By mid-morning the wind had picked up hard. The gray clouds turned black as coal. Thunder rolled in the far distance like war drums, closer with every roll. Storm's coming. A bad one, Nizhoni, eyes on the sky. Emmett knew these desert storms well enough to respect them. Everybody inside, windows secured. Now they had barely finished when the storm hit in earnest. Wind screamed like something alive. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like stones falling. Lightning lit the sky in violent, stuttering flashes, one after another. The children huddled together in the front room, eyes huge, small hands finding each other in the dark. "Something bad going to happen to us?" Chenoa's voice trembled. "No, this house is strong. It'll keep us safe." He settled in among them, steady as a rock. Then they heard something that turned Emmett's blood to ice, a massive crack, followed by a crash that shook the very ground beneath the house. The old communal barn where the whole town sheltered its livestock during emergencies had come down. Horses, cattle, and goats scattered screaming into the flooded streets. "Dear God, the animals are in danger. I have to help." He was already reaching for his hat. "I'm coming, too." He shook his head. "Too dangerous out there." But Nizhoni met his eyes, steady and entirely unshakable. She had grown up around horses. She knew how they thought, how they moved when they were afraid. She could help. Let her help. He knew she was right. He nodded, already reaching for the door. "Then the kids stay," he started. Nantan was on his feet before the sentence finished. They were helping too. They were part of this family, part of this town. Now the other four scrambled up beside him, standing shoulder to shoulder in one small, unbroken line. "Please, Papa Emmett, let us help. We're strong." Kaya, jaw set, not backing down. He looked at them, so small, so fragile by every measure that should have mattered, but their eyes held nothing childish in that moment at all. Determination. Courage, a fierce kind of love. These were not babies standing in front of him. They were fighters. "All right, but we stay together every second." Understood. Understood, all five, at once, and they went out into the storm as a single unit. The rain lashed them without mercy. The wind nearly knocked the smaller ones flat with every gust. But they moved through it together, and what waited for them in the square was pure chaos. Animals bolting in every direction, townsfolk shouting and grabbing at empty air where a horse had been a second before. Spread out. Little ones chase the small animals. Emmett and I will handle the big ones. Nizhoni, her voice cutting clean over the roar of the storm. Kaya spotted 3 terrified hens huddled beneath a wagon. She crawled underneath, soaked to the skin, murmuring to them, low and soft in Apache, and the hens went still enough to let her scoop them up one by one. She carried them straight back to Mrs. Pruitt's coop without being asked. Nantan found Doc Vega's dog, lost and shaking with fear behind a rain barrel, scooped him up, and ran him home safe into the doctor's arms. Genoa, Ashki, and Dolly worked as one to corner a small herd of runaway goats belonging to a rancher named Wilson, guiding them step by careful step into a covered shed out of the worst of the rain. Meanwhile, Nizhoni worked something close to a miracle with the horses. She walked toward the biggest, most terrified animals without a trace of fear in her, speaking low and even, laying her hands on them with a confidence that seemed to travel straight into their panicked bodies and settle there. Horses that had been screaming and rearing minutes before went quiet and pliant beneath her touch, one after another. "Never seen anything like it," the town blacksmith muttered to Emmett, working beside him to corral a bolting mare. There was one bad moment, near the worst of it, when a panicked bull broke past the men holding the rope line and came crashing straight toward the shed where Ashki and Dolly were still coaxing the last of Wilson's goats to safety. Emmett's heart stopped dead in his chest. But Nizhoni was already moving faster than he had seen anyone move all night, placing herself square between the animal and the children with both arms raised, speaking to it in a voice pitched low and even under the screaming wind. The bull skidded, snorted, and turned aside at the very last stride. Ashki ran straight into his mother's soaked skirts and did not let go for a long while after. Emmett reached them a breath later, and for one shaking moment simply held on to all 3 of them in the driving rain, unable to say a single word. The storm raged on for 2 more hours, 2 hours of hard, dangerous, exhausting work. Not one member of the Callister family quit, not once, not even the smallest of them. When the last animal was finally secured and the rain thinned to a soft drizzle, the 6 of them gathered in the middle of the square, soaked through, caked in mud, worn down to nothing, and smiling anyway. They held on to each other while the whole town looked on in silence. Then something extraordinary happened. Doc Vega began to clap, slow at first, then louder. Etta Brock joined him, then Miss Clara, the schoolteacher. One by one, the people of Cinder Wells fell in until the whole square rang with applause. Even Mrs. Pruitt clapped, tears streaming down her weathered face. They saved my hens. I was so horrible to them, and they went and saved my hens anyway. Nizhoni crossed to her and took her hand. Everyone deserves help, always. Pruitt broke into open tears and pulled Nizhoni into an embrace right there in the mud. A little farther off, a boy named Toby Marsh, who had jeered at the children that first day in the square, approached Nantan slowly, staring hard at his own boots. "I'm sorry for what I said. That was wrong of me." "You're braver than I've ever been." Nantan looked at him a long moment, then smiled and put out his hand. "Friends?" Toby took it. "Friends." That night the 6 of them ate supper together around the same worn table. "Did you see the way they looked at us at the end?" Kaya, still glowing from it. "They weren't afraid anymore," Nizhoni said, quiet pride running through her voice. They'd seen who the family really was. They'd seen their hearts. Emmett raised his water glass. To the Callister family, bravest family Cinder Wells had ever known. "To the family!" The children shouted together, and the little house rang with laughter long into the night. 2 weeks after the storm, Doc Vega came knocking. After midnight, his usual calm rattled clean through. Toby Marsh's little sister had taken a fever that would not break, burning hot enough to frighten her whole family, and his usual remedies had done nothing to touch it. "I don't know what else to try," he admitted at the Callister door. Medical bag already open in his hand, something close to helpless in his face. Nizhoni was already reaching for her shawl. Her grandmother's line carried healers going back generations. She told him quietly, following him out into the dark, willow bark for the fever, and a poultice of desert sage and prickly pear her own mother had taught her to make before she could properly walk. It was not magic. It was knowledge, carried carefully across 100 years of mothers teaching daughters, and she offered it to Doc Vega, now the same way she had offered her hands to the frightened horses in the storm, without hesitation and without once being asked twice. By sunrise, the fever had broken. Doc Vega sat at the girl's bedside long after the danger had passed, watching Nizhoni work with a kind of open astonishment he did not bother to hide. "In 30 years doctoring this territory, I have never seen willow and sage brought together quite like that. Where I trained, we'd have bled her instead, and likely done more harm than good." He looked up at Nizhoni with something like real respect settling into his face for good. "You have more medicine in you than half the men who've hung a shingle in this territory, myself included." Nizhoni only shook her head, tired but pleased. It was not her medicine, she told him. It belonged to her grandmother, and to her grandmother's grandmother before that, and she was only glad, finally, to have found a place where it could be of some use to somebody besides her own 5 children. Word of it moved through Cinder Wells almost as fast as word of the barn collapse had. Within days, 2 more families had quietly come to the Callister door with a sick child or an aching joint, and Nizhoni turned none of them away. It was, Emmett thought, watching her from the porch one evening with her hands wrapped gently around an old rancher's swollen wrist. Its own kind of night of stars, happening one small kindness at a time, long before the real one ever came. A month after the storm, Doc Vega arrived at the Callister house, carrying a large wooden box, and something he had clearly been holding on to for a long while. Nizhoni had mentioned once that her line carried healers, going back generations. That was valuable knowledge, he said. But there was something else her grandmother had left her too, wasn't there? Nizhoni went very still. How could he possibly know that? 'Cause he'd known her grandmother. Years back, before things between their peoples turned so hard, she'd come through this territory once. Told him about her family, about a granddaughter who would have 5 children all at once, called it an old prophecy at the time, and he'd never forgotten it. Tears welled in Nizhoni's eyes. Her grandmother had died before the children were born, but she'd left something behind, a bundle wrapped in leather, and made Nizhoni swear on her life not to open it until the right moment came. Where was it now? In her pack. She'd carried it since they left the tribe, never once knowing when that moment would be. "I believe it's now. Now that you have a home, now that you're safe." She went and returned with a bundle the size of a book, wrapped in worn leather, bound tight with cord. The children crowded around, wide-eyed with curiosity. "What is it, Mama?" Dully breathless. She didn't know, sweetheart. She'd never opened it. "I believe now is exactly the time," Doc Vega said again gently. With hands that trembled, Nizhoni loosened the cords. The leather fell away to reveal a book, but no ordinary book. Old, bound in tanned hide, its pages yellowed with age, and covered edge to edge in careful drawings and symbols nobody in that room but Nizhoni could read. "It's beautiful," someone whispered. She opened it with great care. The first page carried a message written in Apache, and she read it aloud, translating as she went, her voice thickening with every line. For her granddaughter and her 5 stars, This knowledge had passed hand to hand for 1,000 years. These were maps of the night sky. Their ancestors had learned to read the stars. The stars guide, the stars teach, the stars bind every living thing to the whole of creation. This was her gift, her inheritance. Use it well. Remarkable, Doc Vega murmured, turning the pages with careful fingers. An ancient star atlas. Indigenous astronomical knowledge. Generations deep. Priceless, and he meant it. Then he opened the wooden box and lifted out something bright. An old brass telescope, weathered but sound, its wood dark with age. It had been his father's. His father had loved the stars more than almost anything. When he passed, Doc Vega kept it, never quite sure what to do with it. Now he did. It had always been meant for this family. He was certain of that. Now the children whooped with delight. That night after supper, the 6 of them went out to the porch together. Emmett set the telescope up, pointed toward the darkening sky. The stars came out overhead like scattered diamonds on black velvet, more of them than any of the children had ever bothered to count. Nizhoni opened the old book by lamplight, showing them a drawing. This was the constellation of the eagle. Her ancestor's messenger of the sky. Find it, and a person knew they were walking the right path. Nantan peered through the telescope, adjusting the focus with careful fingers, and let out a shout. He could see it. He could see the eagle. One by one, each child took a turn, finding the constellation for themselves, faces lit with pure wonder in the lamplight. Emmett looked too, and realized he had never in his whole life seen the stars quite this clearly before. It's like magic, Kaya breathed. It wasn't magic, Nizhoni told her softly. It was knowledge. It was science. It was the universe showing its secrets to whoever finally took the time to really look. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable took root in Cinder Wells. Every night the Callister family set the telescope up on their porch, and every night a little more of the town came to look. First it was Toby Marsh, properly apologetic now, asking politely if he might see the stars. Nantan taught him with real generosity. Then Miss Clara brought a handful of her students. Then Doc Vega brought a few curious adults along behind them. Soon the Callister porch had become the town's evening gathering place. People came from every corner of Cinder Wells to learn about the sky. The 5 children, quick studies every one, became the town's own little astronomers, teaching grown men and women things they had never once thought to wonder about before. A month later, the town organized its first night of stars out on the schoolyard. More than 50 people came, lanterns strung between the fence posts, blankets spread across the grass, children of every family in Cinder Wells jostling for a turn at the telescope, Mrs. Mitten, and Pruitt arrived early with a basket of her own baking, apologizing to Nizhoni all over again before she'd even set it down, and stayed the whole evening with Chenoa asleep against her shoulder by the end of it. Toby Marsh's family came too, his little sister fully recovered and chattering the whole night about the willow bark medicine that had saved her. Emmett, Nizhoni, and the 5 children gave a presentation that left the whole crowd hushed and amazed, Nizhoni tracing the old star maps against the real sky overhead, while her children took turns pointing out constellations to grown men and women twice their age, patient as any teacher Cinder Wells had ever paid away. The mayor rose to speak once it was finished. The Callister family had brought something rare to Cinder Wells, he said, voice thick with feeling. Not only knowledge, but unity. They had taught the whole town to look past its differences, taught it to look up instead, on behalf of every soul present, thank you. The crowd broke into applause. Nizhoni cried openly, with joy. The children beamed with pride, bright enough to light up the whole yard. Emmett pulled every one of them into his arms at once, right there, in front of the entire town. Becoming a member of this channel is one of the simplest ways to keep more stories like this one coming. Just tap join beside the channel name whenever you're ready. it means a great deal. That night, once the schoolyard had emptied, and everyone had gone home to their own beds, the Callister family walked back to their own house at the end of the main street and settled together on their own porch under a sky gone thick with stars. Do you remember just 2 months ago, we were out there, you were lost, and I was alone. Emmett, looking out at the dark shape of the desert beyond the yard. Now we have a family. Kaya, leaning her head against his shoulder. Now we have a home, Nantan. Now we have friends, Shanoa. Now we have purpose, Ashki, sitting up straight like the word deserved it. Now we have love. Doli, soft and certain, last of the 5. Nizhoni reached over in the dark and took Emmett's hand. Her fingers were warm and steady and sure. And now, she said, we have stars to guide us. Emmett looked up at the vast wheel of the sky. More stars scattered overhead than he could ever hope to count, over the very same desert that had so nearly taken this family from him before he'd even known they were his to lose. His mother used to tell him, the stars were the souls of the people who loved us. Watching from up there, he believed his father was up there somewhere, proud of the man he'd turned out to be. And he believed Nizhoni's grandmother was up there too, proud of her and proud of 5 miracles she never once got to meet. Then we are never really alone, Kaya. Soft. Never. He looked around at all of them, Nizhoni's hand still warm and his 5 children leaning into him from every side, a home behind them that had stood empty for 23 years and would not stand empty again. Always, we are 6. This was never a story that needed an altar to end well, and it never got one. What Emmett Callister and Nizhoni built on that porch was not a wedding vow. It was something the frontier rarely handed anyone freely. A family assembled entirely on purpose, out of choice, in front of a whole town that had to learn, the hard way, to deserve them. Nizhoni never once stopped being the one who carried the real gift into Cinder Wells, her grandmother's knowledge, her steady hands with a terrified horse, a dignity that never bent under one single cruel word thrown at her. Emmett always said it plain to anyone who asked afterward. They were the ones who saved him, not the other way around. A lonely man got handed 5 reasons to get up every morning, and a mother who had been left for dead got a whole town willing, eventually, to look up at the same sky she did. Families are not only made in churches, and they are not only made by blood. Sometimes they are made in desert heat over one shared canteen of water. Sometimes they are made by a promise spoken once and kept every single day after, without fail, without exception. Sometimes 6 strangers become a family that a whole town ends up standing behind, applauding in the rain, admitting out loud that they were wrong. That is the family Nizhoni and Emmett built together, chosen, not inherited, and every bit as real and every bit as lasting as any family the world insists on calling ordinary. Years from that porch, the story of the lonely cowboy who said, "Now we are 6, would still be told in Cinder Wells, passed down the way the good stories always are, half legend and half plain fact, by the time the youngest listeners heard it. It would be told as a story about a desert and a canteen and a vow. But it would really be a story about what happens when one person decides that a stranger's suffering is not someone else's problem to solve, about a mother who never once let the desert or a hard town take her dignity from her, and a man who learned that the family he'd always assumed life owed him could, in fact, be built by hand. Patience and a willingness to say yes. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are more stories, like Nizhoni and Emmett's, on the way, and every one of them is worth the time. Thank you for riding along with us tonight, and thank you, always, for believing a family built on purpose is every bit as real as one built any other way. We'll see you in the next one.